The explosion ripped through the dust before she ever saw the flash. A roar, a concussion wave, then silence. The kind that hums in your skull. Lieutenant Isabel Carter blinked grit from her eyes and saw the street ahead collapse in on itself, concrete folding like paper. The convoy was gone. The trucks, the civilians, the journalists. Gone. Her headset crackled with static. "Alpha Team, sit rep." No answer. Then, "Isabel?" The voice was faint, distorted, but familiar. "Isabel, I'm hit." Her stomach dropped. "Danny?" she shouted, running. The dust was still thick as smoke. She could taste metal and blood. Somewhere under the wreckage, someone was groaning. A sound raw and wet, like an animal trapped. She jumped over debris, her medic's pack slamming against her back. Her boots slipped on shattered glass, her breath ragged. And then she saw him, half buried under a slab of concrete, camera strap tangled around his arm, eyes wide with pain and disbelief. Daniel Carter, her brother, the man who'd spent years mocking everything she stood for. "You came?" His voice was barely a rasp, half choked by dust. She dropped to her knees beside him, hands already working through muscle memory. Pressure bandage, airway check, morphine if she could find the vein through the shaking. Her reply was quiet, steady. "Of course I did." Family always comes, even when it doesn't call. He tried to laugh, but coughed blood instead. "You shouldn't be here." She didn't look at him. "Neither should you." Somewhere behind them, gunfire cracked, short, controlled bursts. Her squad was returning fire. Isabel ducked instinctively, covering Daniel's head with her arm. "Stay awake, Danny," she ordered. "I swear, if you die after that article, I'll kill you myself." Hours earlier, Daniel had been on assignment, a field immersion to accompany a convoy delivering aid outside Aleppo. The journalist in him wanted authenticity. The cynic in him wanted irony. His most recent column had gone viral under the title, "The Futility of Uniforms." He had written, "We send children in armor to fix problems grown men created. We call it honor because the truth feels smaller." Isabel's unit had read it during chow. The silence afterward was suffocating. Sergeant Vega, her second, had muttered, "That's your brother?" Isabel had nodded, jaw tight. Used to be. Now, here he was, bleeding under her hands, trapped in a war he had only ever described from afar. "Can you move your legs?" she asked, scanning the wound. He grimaced. "I can feel them. Can't move them." "Good. That means they're still there." He let out a weak laugh that turned into a cough. "You really think humor works in triage?" "I think truth does," she said, tightening the tourniquet. "This is going to hurt." "Everything already does." "Good. That means you're still alive." The sound of approaching engines broke through the chaos. Reinforcements, maybe, or worse. She didn't care. She looped her arms under his shoulders, heaved, and dragged him inch by inch toward the medevac zone. Her lungs burned. The sand in her mouth tasted like iron. Every pull left a streak of blood across the concrete. Behind them, the wrecked convoy smoldered. Ahead, the faint whoop, whoop, whoop of helicopter blades. Through the haze, Vega appeared, rifle slung across her chest. "Ma'am!" "We have to move. Drone sighting east." "I'm not leaving him." "That's not an order, that's suicide." "Then it's family business," Isabel snapped. Vega didn't argue, just knelt, grabbed Daniel's legs, and together they hauled him across the rubble, ducking as the sound of distant gunfire flared again. The medevac bird descended like an angel in smoke, rotors chopping the air, wash whipping sand into their faces. As they reached the ramp, Daniel's grip tightened weakly around her wrist. He tried to speak but couldn't. She bent close enough to hear his whisper through the din. "You came." Her answer was simple, quiet, almost a confession. "Always." The helicopter lifted. Below them, the city shrank into a storm of dust and flame, the same color as the arguments that had burned between them for years. And for the first time since childhood, Daniel didn't have a word to say. "Breaking," An army medic rescues a civilian journalist during an active engagement outside Aleppo. Footage shows Lieutenant Isabel Carter carrying her brother, war correspondent Daniel Carter, to safety under fire. The image floods every network. The two silhouettes in a wasteland of smoke, her in fatigues, him limp in her arms. No one watching yet knows their last name is the same. But by nightfall, the world will. While Isabel lies awake in a field tent replaying every second of the rescue, the world back home begins to recognize the irony. The journalist who condemned the military owes his life to the soldier he dismissed. And for their father, the man who raised one to shine and the other to serve, the story isn't just breaking news. It's Judgment Day. The world learned their last name before sunrise. By the time the footage looped across cable news, the internet had already made the connection. Lieutenant Isabel Carter, U.S. Army medic, sister of journalist Daniel Carter, author of The Futility of Uniforms. The irony wrote itself. Hashtags multiplied like wildfire. The uniform saved him trended before breakfast. But for Isabel, there was no satisfaction in it. She wasn't watching screens. She was watching her brother breathe. The field hospital smelled of iodine and dust, that mix of medicine and war that never quite washed away. Isabel sat by Daniel's cot, boots planted on the cracked floor, uniform sleeves still stained a faint brown. The machines beeped with slow regularity, a lullaby for survivors. He was unconscious, sedated. His hands, the hands that had typed 1,000 sharp sentences about men like her, now lay still, pale against the sheets. Sergeant Vega entered quietly, dropping a ration bar beside her. "Eat. You look like hell." Isabel didn't look up. "Thanks for the poetry." "Command wants your report by 1600. They're calling it a civilian rescue." Isabel snorted. "He's hardly a civilian. He's a walking editorial." Vega leaned against the post. "You going to tell them who he is?" "No." "You sure?" "That story's already out." "Then let it run itself," Isabel said flatly. "I'm not turning this into a headline." She hadn't always been this hard. Once she'd been Daniel's shadow, the quiet sister with scraped knees who sat through his debates at the dinner table, memorizing every word. He was their father's pride, articulate, sharp, impossible to win against. He had been right about everything since the age of 12. When she announced she was enlisting, he'd looked at her like she'd confessed a sin. "You? A soldier? Why not me?" "Because you think duty is the same thing as direction." It's not. Their father, Robert Carter, had chuckled into his wine. "Let her go, son." Everyone experiments in their 20s. Her mother, Martha, had said softly, "Service doesn't need headlines." It was the last real conversation they'd had before she shipped out. Boot camp stripped her illusions and rebuilt her in steel. She learned the anatomy of fear, what it looked like, smelled like, sounded like in someone else's breath. And she learned that courage wasn't cinematic. It was a series of small, stubborn refusals to quit. In those years, Daniel's byline grew. He became a columnist, then a correspondent. He wrote about foreign policy, moral contradictions, and the tragic futility of the uniformed conscience. He never mentioned her name. When their mother died, Isabel couldn't come home. She was on deployment. Daniel delivered the eulogy. Her father called once, voice sharp. "You missed it." She kept asking for you. "I'm sorry, Dad." "The mission." "The mission? You think medals matter more than memory?" He hung up before she could answer. From then on, her family became a country she no longer had a visa to enter. Now, watching Daniel sleep, she couldn't tell if saving him felt like victory or punishment. He'd spent years deconstructing everything she believed in. Yet when his blood spilled, she hadn't hesitated. Because that's what service was. Not liking someone, but saving them anyway. She adjusted his IV line, wiped the grime from his temple, and muttered, "You owe me one, Danny. A big one." Back home, their father was staring at a television in his kitchen. The footage froze on the image of Isabel carrying Daniel, her face streaked with dirt, her arm around his chest, his limp hand clutching her sleeve. The reporter's voice was solemn. Sources confirm the soldier is Lieutenant Isabel Carter, the journalist's sister. The rescue has sparked a global discussion on service, family, and redemption. Robert's coffee went cold. His eyes never left the screen. For years, he'd told his golf buddies, Daniel's the mind, Isabel's the muscle. Now he couldn't tell which one had saved the other. He reached for the remote, paused, then didn't turn it off. His reflection stared back from the dark glass. A man who had worshipped reputation and missed the revolution happening inside his own bloodline. At the hospital, Daniel stirred. His eyelids fluttered open, unfocused at first, then sharpened with confusion. Where? Isabel leaned forward. You're safe. Base hospital. You lost some blood, but you'll keep your sarcasm. He blinked, voice hoarse. You dragged me out? Technically, Vega helped, but sure, I'll take the credit. He stared at her, disbelief shading into something like shame. I don't understand. You don't need to. Just rest. I mocked you, he said suddenly. All of you. Yeah, she said. I noticed. Why come back? She met his gaze evenly. Because I was there. Because you were there. That's enough. He turned away, eyes wet, the weight of his own words pressing down. The room filled with the low drone of the machines again, the sound of borrowed time. I don't deserve that, he whispered. Good, Isabel said, standing. Then you're finally learning how soldiers feel every day. Outside, Vega waited with the debrief file. You okay, ma'am? Isabel zipped up her jacket. Asked me when he can walk. You think he'll change? She exhaled. He has to. There's no article for this. Night fell. The floodlights flickered against the canvas of the tent. Isabel stepped out into the desert wind, watching the sky burn orange over the ruins. The hum of distant helicopters was steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat that wouldn't quit. For the first time in years, she let herself think of her mother. Martha's voice came back softly, like a hymn remembered halfway through sleep. Service doesn't need headlines. Isabel looked toward the horizon where the medevac had vanished hours earlier. I know, Mom, she murmured. But maybe it found one anyway. Within 24 hours, the footage of Isabel's rescue will explode across the world. Daniel's newspaper will offer him a choice: write about the sister he once dismissed, or resign in disgrace. And for the first time in his career, he'll run out of words. The hospital tent was half empty when the colonel came. A tall woman in desert fatigues, face carved by heat and hierarchy, clipboard in hand. She stopped at Daniel's cot, eyes scanning him, then turned to Isabel. Lieutenant Carter, she said, your rescue report's being reviewed by CENTCOM. Washington wants the narrative controlled before it turns into another PR wildfire. Too late, Isabel said without looking up. The wildfire's global. The colonel exhaled. You're a hero, like it or not. CNN's calling, the Times too. That'll thrill my brother's editors, Isabel muttered. From the bed, Daniel groaned, eyelids fluttering open. No interviews. I need to write my own. The colonel frowned. You can't even sit up. Daniel's voice was dry as sand. I've written under worse deadlines. Isabel turned sharply. You're not turning this into a column. He gave her the ghost of his old grin. Why not? Truth sells. Then maybe try telling some, she said, and walked out before the colonel could intervene. Outside, the desert wind hit like an oven door opening. Isabel squinted against the glare, the weight of the past few days pressing behind her eyes. Vega jogged up beside her, carrying 2 bottles of warm water. Report says you'll be cleared to fly back in 72 hours. I'm not going back, Isabel said. Vega blinked. You're staying with the media circus? I'm finishing the evac grid. We still have civilians cut off past the northern ridge. Ma'am, that's not your responsibility anymore. Isabel twisted off the bottle cap. It's my mother's. That night, alone in her quarters, she unfolded the creased letter she always carried, the one her mother had mailed from her last deployment. The ink had bled from moisture long ago, but the words were still clear enough. If you ever wonder whether compassion makes you weak, remember that courage is only compassion with a spine. Keep yours straight. She closed her eyes. Her mother's handwriting always steadied her heartbeat, like a familiar cadence. Then her tablet pinged. Incoming message, encrypted channel. From Robert Carter at thepresswire.net. Subject, your stunt made headlines. She sighed, opened it. The paper wants Daniel's story. They're spinning it as brother saved by the machine. You might want to get ahead of it before they make you their poster child. Dad. No proud, no glad you're alive. Just strategy. She closed the tablet and whispered, same house, same ghosts. Back at the hospital, Daniel was awake, eyes locked on the muted news screen showing his own face, the photograph of him being carried through smoke by his sister. The caption read, critic of the military saved by soldier's sister in Syria. Reporters had already found their narrative. Daniel stared until the nurse turned it off. He looked down at his bandaged ribs, at the camera sitting on the bedside table. Lens cracked, body scorched. He reached for it, but pain shot up his arm. Don't, the nurse warned. You'll reopen the stitches. He smiled weakly. Writers don't heal until they write. Then maybe start with an apology, she said, and walked out. He did. But not to her. Not yet. He wrote to his editor instead. There's a story I've been avoiding for years. It's not about war. It's about family. And I think it's time I told it. The editor replied within minutes. If it's about your sister, we already have 3 op-eds queued. From cynic to saved. They're calling it that. Daniel stared at the blinking cursor, nausea rising. For once, he couldn't type a single clever sentence. Everything he'd ever written about morality, policy, bravery, all of it turned to ash against the image of Isabel hauling him through gunfire. Meanwhile, at the base command tent, Isabel was summoned again. The colonel slid a folder across the desk. Intel says we've got another cluster of civilians north of the old river bridge. Your last recon coordinates show activity there. Isabel frowned. That's outside our safe perimeter. Exactly why they need you. She hesitated. If I take my team beyond that line, I'll need full authorization. Consider it granted, the colonel said. But Lieutenant, yes, ma'am? The press is watching. This isn't just another mission. It's an example. The words dug deeper than the colonel meant them to. An example. That was what she'd always been, wasn't it? To her father, a lesson in rebellion. To her brother, a caricature of blind obedience. To her mother, the only one who saw her as human, a hope she'd carried into the storm and never brought back. Isabel squared her shoulders. Then let's make it a good one. Back home, Robert Carter sat alone in his study. The glow of the television casting long shadows across framed awards and dusty whiskey bottles. The segment was running again, the one where his daughter carried his son. He muted the sound and poured another drink. On the muted screen, the crawl read, Lieutenant Carter defies orders to save civilian brother. The irony cut deep. He'd raised them both to win. Daniel with words, Isabel with will. But he'd never expected her will to outlast his pride. He reached for the old family photo on his desk. Isabel at 18 in uniform. Daniel at his graduation. Martha in between them, smiling. He ran a thumb across his wife's face and muttered, You'd be proud of her, wouldn't you? The silence that followed was heavier than guilt. Hey, it was grief refusing to fade. At dawn, Isabel's squad rolled out again. The terrain ahead shimmered with heat and danger, the kind of landscape where pride and purpose both dissolve. Vega glanced over. Ma'am, any word from your brother? He's alive. That's enough. And your father? Still pretending silence is leadership. Guess that runs in the family, Vega teased. Isabel smiled faintly. Not for long. By midday, they reached the old bridge. Smoke curled from the far side. Refugees, maybe 50, huddled beneath a collapsed overpass, waving makeshift flags. The team set up triage, ration distribution, signal flares for evac choppers. As she worked, Isabel thought of her mother's letter again. Compassion with a spine. It wasn't glory, it was grit. When the helicopters arrived, she watched each child lifted aboard, each elder carried gently, each family finding safety. And somewhere above them, a camera drone hummed, capturing her face once more. The soldier who'd saved a man who'd mocked her. In Washington, the story spreads faster than the rescue. Daniel's editors want an exclusive interview between brother and sister. The military's PR division sees opportunity. Isabel sees a trap. And their father, the man who lit the fuse between them years ago, is about to face the broadcast that will undo his silence forever. 2 weeks later, the story stopped being a story. It became a spectacle. News vans lined the gates of Walter Reed. Drone cameras hovered over the tarmac whenever a transport flight came in, hoping to catch a glimpse of the Carter siblings. Daniel's face was on magazine covers now, clean-shaven, composed, the headline beneath him reading, "A Brother's Redemption, from Critic to Survivor." And Isabel's photo, the one where she carried him, had already been turned into a recruiting poster. She hated it. Inside her quarters, Isabel sat on the cot staring at her uniform, folded neatly beside her. The metal pin to the chest plate gleamed faintly under the lamp. She'd saved dozens of lives before that day, but the only one anyone cared about was his. Vega entered, holding a tablet. "You made the front page again, ma'am. They're calling you the Iron Sister." Isabel smirked. "Sounds like a bad superhero franchise." "Also," Vega continued, "Public Affairs wants to coordinate a joint interview. You and Daniel. Stateside. Prime time." Isabel's jaw tightened. "Who approved that?" "Your father, apparently." Her head snapped up. "He what?" Vega shrugged. "The network said the families agreed to a sit-down special. Bloodlines of Bravery. Live from D.C. I didn't agree to that. Guess he did for you." Robert Carter was nothing if not predictable. He had built his empire and his children's lives on controlling the story. He'd already done the morning show circuit, speaking solemnly about family unity and understanding the cost of service. When asked if he was proud of his daughter, he paused for effect. "I always believed Isabel had potential. She just needed the right moment to show it." To the audience, he sounded gracious. To her, he sounded like ownership disguised as pride. That night, Isabel called Daniel. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, hero." "Don't call me that." "Then what should I call you?" "The reason I still have both legs?" She sighed. "They're booking us for a joint interview." "Did you know?" He hesitated. "Yeah, Dad told me. Said it'd heal the family image." "Image," she repeated, almost laughing. "He never changes." "He's trying, Is. By turning us into headlines? By admitting what he's never said, that you're the strong one." "That's not what he said to me at Mom's funeral." The silence on the line stretched like a wound reopening. Daniel finally spoke. "I can't fix what I wrote, but I can make sure people hear what you lived." "You think an interview redeems anything?" "No, but maybe it starts something." She wanted to stay angry, but the weariness in his voice diffused her. For the first time, Daniel sounded less like a columnist and more like a man unlearning himself. "Fine," she said quietly. "We'll do it." But not for him. For Mom. The studio lights were too bright, the air too still. The stage, a glossy reflection of 2 chairs, 1 flag, 1 family name. Isabel adjusted her jacket, her uniform perfectly pressed. Daniel sat beside her, cane at his side, face composed for the camera. Across from them, the interviewer smiled her practiced smile. Tonight, the nation meets the Carters, the soldier and the journalist, the sister who saved her brother. "Lieutenant, Daniel, thank you for being here." Isabel nodded. Daniel murmured thanks. Then the questions began, gentle at first, then sharper. "Daniel, you once called soldiers blind instruments of misplaced faith. Does that still reflect your view?" He swallowed. "No, it reflected my ignorance." "And what changed?" He turned toward Isabel. "Reality. Her." The audience stirred. The interviewer leaned forward. "Lieutenant Carter, what's it like to save someone who dismissed everything you stood for?" Isabel hesitated. She could feel the cameras waiting for drama, for tears, but she refused to perform. "It's the same as saving anyone," she said evenly. "Pain doesn't check politics before it bleeds." The crowd murmured. Daniel's eyes flicked toward her. Admiration, guilt, maybe both. The interviewer wasn't satisfied. But it must be personal. Isabel's tone sharpened. It's professional. That's the difference between writing about honor and living by it. Silence. Even Daniel didn't speak. When the segment aired, it went viral. Again. Clips spread across social media under captions like, "The soldier who answered without bitterness." The comment threads overflowed with respect and awe. And somewhere between the noise, a private clip surfaced. Off-camera footage leaked by a crew member. In it, after the broadcast, Daniel could be heard telling his father backstage, "You should apologize to her." For what? For everything you taught me to believe about her. Robert's reply was low, almost broken. "I already did. Just not out loud." Back at the hotel that night, Isabel stood on the balcony overlooking the city lights. Her phone buzzed. Another message from the old number she'd almost blocked a dozen times. It was from her father. A single line. "You've done what I couldn't. You carried the family back into the light." She typed and deleted 3 responses before leaving it unanswered. Some words needed time to mean anything. The next morning, Daniel knocked on her door. He held a folded piece of paper. "The column's running tomorrow. You should read it before it hits print." She took it reluctantly, opened it, scanned the first paragraph, and froze. "I spent my life dissecting bravery until it stopped being real. Then my sister carried me through a fire I'd only ever written about. The truth is simple. Courage doesn't need permission to exist. It just needs a reason." Her throat tightened. "You wrote this?" He smiled faintly. "Couldn't let everyone else tell the story wrong. Dad'll frame it." Let him. For once, the frame will hold something true. By evening, the article had reached every major network. Veteran forums lit up with gratitude. Schools requested Isabel for commencement speeches. Donations poured into veteran medical programs. And in one quiet suburban kitchen, Robert Carter tore the clipping from the morning paper, smoothed it flat, and taped it above the family photo on the fridge. He stared at it a long time, then whispered, "Martha, she did it." For once, the silence in the house wasn't judgment. It was reverence. But the true reckoning doesn't come with applause. It comes weeks later, when Isabel returns home to visit her father and finds him waiting in full dress uniform, not to boast, but to salute. The knock on her barracks door came just after dawn. "Lieutenant Carter," Vega called softly. "Visitor for you." Isabel glanced up from the field reports she was signing. "Tell the press they can wait until I'm retired." "It's not the press," Vega said, voice gentler than usual. "It's your father." She froze. Outside, through the narrow window, she saw him, Robert Carter, standing by the flagpole, back straight, wearing his old Marine dress uniform that hadn't seen daylight in 30 years. The last time she'd seen him in it was her mother's funeral. He looked smaller now, or maybe just human. When she stepped outside, the morning air was crisp, the parade ground quiet except for the rustle of flags in the breeze. He turned at the sound of her boots and smiled, an awkward, trembling thing. "You look..." He stopped himself, then started again. "You look like her." "Mom?" she asked. He nodded. "Exactly like her." She kept her hands clasped behind her back, the officer's stance giving her something to hold on to. "Why are you here, Dad?" He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope, weathered at the edges. "I found this last night. Your mother wrote it before she passed, addressed to both of us. I think she meant for me to give it to you when I stopped being a fool." She took it carefully. Her name was on the front, in that familiar looping cursive she hadn't seen in years. Inside, the letter read, "If you're reading this, I hope pride no longer lives between you. I always knew the world would test you both differently, one with glory, one with guilt. But remember, family is not about who shines. It's about who stands." When she looked up, her father's eyes were wet. "I never stood for you, Izzy. Not once." "Dad." "No, let me finish." His voice cracked, but he forced it steady. "I raised you to chase approval, not purpose. I mocked your service because I couldn't understand it. You made me face what I'd lost, and who I could have been." He stepped back and lifted his hand to his temple. A salute, formal, perfect, trembling. For a heartbeat, Isabel couldn't move. Then instinct took over. She returned it, palm cutting through sunlight, 2 generations of pride folding into one motion. The soldiers across the yard noticed. One by one, they turned toward the flag and saluted too, not for protocol, but for something quieter, cleaner. The silence felt sacred. After a while, he lowered his arm. "You'll always be the best thing I ever misunderstood." She managed a faint smile. "That's progress." He chuckled. "It's something." Then, almost shyly, he added, "Do you mind if I visit Daniel at the paper? He's trying to be less of a Carter." "Go," she said. He could use someone to argue with besides editors. He looked relieved, almost proud. "You always were the peacekeeper." "No," she corrected softly. "Just the one who refused to surrender." Later that week, Isabel stood beside Daniel at a veterans outreach event. The hall was crowded with students and families, the air smelling faintly of coffee and metal polish. When the host introduced them, the Carters, a family rewritten by courage, she almost laughed at the irony. Daniel leaned in. "He's in the audience, you know." "I figured. Brought Mom's locket," Daniel added quietly. "Said she'd want to see us together." When Isabel took the stage, the applause was deafening, but she waited until it softened to speak. "I'm not here as a hero," she began. "Heroes are the ones who don't get to tell their story. I'm here because I was lucky enough to survive and stubborn enough to learn." She paused, scanning the crowd until her gaze found her father. He was sitting near the back, posture perfect, eyes fixed on her, hand resting on the locket at his chest. "I used to think service meant strength," she said. "But strength isn't loud. It's steady. It's the hand that doesn't let go, even when everything else tells you to." A hush settled over the hall. Daniel's eyes glistened. Reporters lowered their cameras. "Family taught me that," she continued, "even when it hurt." When she finished, no one moved at first. Then the crowd stood, slow, unified, reverent. The kind of standing that wasn't applause but acknowledgement. Her father rose with them, the old Marine among civilians, his hand over his heart. Their eyes met, and for the first time, there was nothing left to forgive. Later, outside, under the pale afternoon sky, Daniel asked, "So what now? Another deployment? A book deal?" She smiled faintly. "Neither. Maybe I'll teach, or build something that lasts longer than medals." "Mom would like that." "Yeah," she said softly. "She'd say it's time." They walked together toward the parking lot, where their father waited by his car. He held the door for them, a small, ordinary gesture that somehow carried all the years of apology he'd never spoken. As they drove off, the sun dipped low, catching the edges of the folded flag decal on her Jeep. The wind through the open window smelled like dust, diesel, and redemption. The headlines fade, but legacy doesn't. Months later, Daniel writes his final column, not about war or politics, but about the simple power of one salute. And Isabel learns that sometimes forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It rebuilds what pride destroyed. The news cycle moved on, as news always does. But some stories never stopped echoing. For months, people still shared the photo. Isabel in fatigues, Daniel on the stretcher, her father saluting. It became less of a headline and more of a memory the nation refused to delete. At the base, Isabel found quiet again. Mornings meant paperwork, drills, coffee with Vega. Evenings meant letters, real ones, from veterans, students, mothers. Some said thank you. Others said, "I understand." All of them said what her family couldn't for years. "We see you." Daniel kept writing, but differently now. No more polemics, no more clever detachment. His columns had softened, or maybe they'd deepened. The first one after the ceremony began. "I once believed words could fix everything. Then I learned they can only reveal what action has already healed." He donated half his royalties to veteran mental health programs. When asked by colleagues why, he smiled, "Because the uniform that saved me deserves more than applause." It wasn't guilt. It was gratitude learning how to breathe. And their father, Robert Carter, the man who once measured worth in status, started volunteering at the VA clinic every Friday. He didn't make speeches or pose for photos. He just cleaned tables, carried coffee, and listened to the men and women his pride had once erased. When one of the veterans asked, "You a Marine?" he nodded. "Long time ago." The man grinned. "You still stand like one." Robert smiled, eyes wet. "I finally had a good teacher." Isabel's squad was reassigned stateside for a short rotation. For the first time in years, she had weekends free. She spent them at a local veteran school, teaching trauma care to high schoolers, kids who'd never seen war, but who understood what it meant to want to help. One afternoon, as she wrapped up class, a student raised his hand. "Ma'am, my brother says you carried yours out of a war zone." "Why'd you do it?" "He said he used to make fun of you." The room quieted. Isabel smiled gently. Because family isn't about being right. It's about showing up. The boy nodded slowly, the kind of understanding that sinks deep and stays. On the first anniversary of the rescue, Daniel asked her to come to Washington for a live panel, Courage and Communication in Modern Conflict. She hesitated, then agreed. But what she didn't know was that he had something else planned. When she arrived, the auditorium was full. Military brass, journalists, students. At the front of the stage stood Daniel, smiling nervously beside a draped object on a stand. "Before we start," he told the crowd, "there's something I need to give my sister." He gestured for her to join him. When she stepped forward, he pulled the cloth away. Beneath it stood a bronze sculpture. Small, minimalist, hauntingly familiar. A soldier, bent but unbroken, carrying a wounded man toward the light. At its base, engraved words, "Honor doesn't shout, it endures." The room fell silent. Even the photographers lowered their cameras. Daniel turned to her, voice trembling. "You once told me you don't write about honor. You live with it." "I didn't understand that then. I do now." Her throat tightened. "Danny." He shook his head, eyes bright. "No speeches is. Just thank you for coming back when no one else would." She smiled faintly, brushed the dust off the sculpture's edge, and said the simplest truth. "You finally carried your own weight." He laughed, soft and ashamed and grateful all at once. After the event, they walked outside into the cool dusk. The sky over D.C. was streaked pink and gray, the Potomac shining like a medal in twilight. Robert waited by the memorial steps, standing tall despite his cane. When they reached him, he handed Isabel a small box, the kind used for medals, old but well kept. Inside was his own Purple Heart. "I kept it too long," he said. "I think you know what to do with it." She shook her head. "It's yours," he smiled. "Not anymore. You earned it without needing it." She placed her hand over his, closing the box gently. "Then I'll keep it as a promise." "To what?" he asked. "That our name finally means something worth carrying." A month later, she visited her mother's grave, the one thing still untouched by all the noise. The grass was freshly cut, the stone clean. She knelt, brushing off a leaf, and laid the Purple Heart at its base. "Mom," she whispered, "you can rest now." We figured it out, all of us. A breeze stirred, lifting a strand of hair against her cheek. The air smelled faintly of rain and jet fuel, the scent of departure, of arrival, of everything in between. She stood, saluted the grave, then turned toward the horizon. The world was still broken, still loud, still in need of mending. But at least her part of it, her family, her silence, her service, was whole again. That night, Daniel sent her one last message. No subject line, no greeting, just a single sentence. "Some wars end when someone stops fighting. Ours ended when you did." She read it twice, smiled, and finally allowed herself to sleep. The uniform never asked for apologies, only understanding. Some families are rebuilt not by winning, but by carrying each other home. If you've ever been mocked, doubted, or dismissed, but stood long enough for truth to stand beside you, subscribe for more Honor Line stories, where silence carries strength, forgiveness ends wars, and dignity never dies.